Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to talk about, from a manufacturing outsourcing perspective, some of the different criteria that become important, certainly listening through the last several days of discussion around the importance of the partnerships, being able to drive the value that you expect out of a partner, and using those service partners to achieve your goals because of the reduced financial availability, really the scarcity of resources, et cetera. I wanted to take a look at how really to approach a partnership, and I broadened it beyond manufacturing services, which is the industry we're in or the service we provide, and tried to take a broader view so it would be applicable, I hope, to some of the other partnerships that you may have. Really talking about the environment, we've spent several days, so I'm not going to dwell on the environment, but certainly as a service provider, we recognize that vaccine development and delivery is facing a complex global environment. All the government, budgetary issues, the NGO participation, delivery challenges in critical regions. We've actually heard a lot of great thinking around those issues and potential solutions, ways to approach potential solutions, and looking at it from the vaccine developer's perspective, really being able to achieve commercialization goals with the limited resources at your disposal, looking toward the service partner of any kind, really, to deliver and help you deliver to your objectives. From a vaccine perspective, certainly in the seasonal situations, we really look at that short window of time to take advantage of market opportunities. The compression of the time available from really the approval and the manufacturing production and the entry into the market is incredibly complex and really challenging. And this is where really being able to rely on a partner in any industry in those situations, we would have to be reliable to execute on those situations, so it requires specialized experience and expertise. So being able to harness those resources and talent in service partners really provides a competitive advantage for those in the vaccine space. So really, from my perspective, if you look at the trend from a service provider's perspective, we see a shift in utilization of a number of, in our perspective, CMOs, but it could really be any service provider. So we have a partner that had over 65 CMO, contract manufacturing organizations, from 2001. They actually had over 200 back in the late 90s. I mean, an incredible number of partners to keep track of. So they have been working diligently to reduce that network so that they could reduce the cost associated with that, the oversight cost, and also the risk that introduces. They've taken an assessment of the different CMOs. They looked at their needs, read the gap analysis we talk about all the time in the different aspects of the vaccine industry. They categorized CMOs from a transactional and service provider perspective so that they knew who they needed to really rely on, who they didn't, because you have to invest in those partners. They identified those partners and they integrated them into the manufacturing network. Now, the key here, and I'm sure it's not lost on anybody in the room, is that if you're going to drop down to 5 CMOs or 5 service partners from any area that you're talking about, you need to be able to rely on them because you've now actually introduced a different sort of risk. Right? If one of those key suppliers fail, you could have actually introduced risk when you were trying to eliminate it. So being able to select those service partners is critical to this reduction, this efficiency, this achievement that you are trying to move towards. So from my perspective, I found this picture of this woman because I feel like vaccine manufacturing really is complicated, so there are hurdles. It is a race. You have to get to the market. You know, it's a compressed manufacturing situation. There's volume. There's a ton of complexity. You know, if you're talking about the conjugates, all these different manufacturing parameters, it's incredibly sophisticated. And there's also the tender-driven aspect where you have a ton of volatility from a market perspective. So when we look at CMO selection, it's well characterized from a manufacturing assessment perspective. There's long-standing, well-utilized tools. It's data-driven. You can go into a plant. You can evaluate the equipment. You see it. You can tell what it looks like, how it operates, et cetera. So that's well-known. You can look at regulatory history. That's also well-known. It's public information. You can determine if the service provider has relevant experience. And then in all of the assessments I found, and I did a huge literature search just as I was kind of trying to build out my thinking, it talks about customer service as the fourth pillar of the assessment when you choose a partner. And to me, customer service isn't actually what you should be looking for. Customer service doesn't really encompass the fourth pillar to me, and that's what I wanted to discuss today, and at least maybe plant a seed that you should expand your thinking around this fourth pillar. So what I'm thinking about or suggesting to you is that partnership ability is more relevant, and I'm not trying to wordsmith. What I mean is this ability to achieve results through a team. It's an ability to utilize the harness of a complex matrix team. So it's more than customer service. It's how do you partner? It also, of course, encompasses customer service, and it can be assessed, and it is a meaningful contributor to your service provider's ability to deliver on commitments. I'm suggesting that this assessment needs to increase in weighting as compared to the other considerations. If you're seeking to achieve your objectives through other service providers, how that gets done is very important. It can be the difference between success and failure, because if it's incredibly difficult, if you end up spending more time on managing a service provider than you could have done it yourself. I mean, why would you get a service partner, right? So this part seems to be very underrepresented and needs to be further evaluated and assessed. And I think the difficulty with this, and this morning this came up, is that it's subjective. It feels subjective. But what I'm going to suggest a framework where we can use data to find out how partners actually demonstrate their ability. So I was researching a lot of the literature on team effectiveness, and it shows that there's just tons of studies out there that show that 50 to 80% of teams managing complex projects do not achieve their objectives. They're either over budget, they miss their timelines, or the project itself is actually ultimately disbanded and they don't achieve their objective at all. And the primary driver in study after study was that process and alignment are usually the reasons for failure. So it's not a technical challenge, it's essentially how people partner, how they work together. So when you look at a complex project, which vaccine manufacturing certainly is, it requires an identifiable skill set. And these skills need to be learned. They are not innate. There are best demonstrated practices, team dynamics need to be considered, and knowledge must be shared and effectively harnessed. So how do you do that? Or what is my suggestion to take this from subjective to data-driven, or at least evidence-based? So I think that there are 6 criteria for evaluating partnership ability. So management philosophy, hiring, engagement, training, metrics, and improvement. And I'll go through this and what you can look for to see what a service partner does to demonstrate their ability here. So from a management philosophy perspective, generally speaking, what you'll see is everyone, all service providers, will say that we can partner. Of course, right? You're going to say you can partner. And usually the proof of that is just a listing of companies that they have somehow or done business with in the past. That really isn't an effective predictor for your future success. You don't have any idea of how those projects went. It's difficult to get referrals, right, because of confidentiality. So what I'm suggesting is you can see underneath this from a management philosophy perspective by asking a service provider who owns service and partnering in your organization. It's a simple question. Who owns this? Who is the identifiable and accountable resource in your organization that focuses on partnering skills and your service culture in your organization? If there isn't a quick answer to who that person is, you have an answer. There should be somebody in these organizations that thinks about this. And are there organizational metrics in place that measure success from a management perspective? If it doesn't go to the CEO of the company, the general manager, a plant manager, someone that is accountable for all your results, if they can't name who is responsible for this and they don't measure it, from a management philosophy perspective, I think you have an answer that you should start to think about. From a hiring engagement perspective, you can determine service orientation and partnering ability by asking about a service provider's hiring process. How do they screen their candidates? Do they interview candidates in relationship to these abilities? Do they rank candidates on their interview, on these criteria? Do they orient new employees, right? Do they mentor so they have a positive role modeling in place? And how do they maintain employee engagement? So what programs and practices do they have that align your client, your manufacturing service provider to your objectives, as well as what metrics are in place? From a training perspective, by building these teams, the highly performing teams, they don't happen. So questioning around how do you build this skill set within your organization? How do you train, for example, program management, some of the manufacturing management team? How do you train to this resource? You can ask to see the training plan for all of the employees that would be customer facing. That training plan should, and I just went through some things that occurred to me, right? Are they trained in effective team composition? Do they know how to find the right people and pull them forward to your teams? Do they know how to assess and interpret situational leadership? Are they trained in situational leadership skills? Problem-solving tools, lean philosophy, are they trained from a cultural awareness and diversity perspective? There are multinational matrixed teams, and that can be challenging. So are they trained to overcome that? Do they understand that? Of course, communication is critical, and is there a discipline from around learning and sharing knowledge in the teams within the facility and then into the organization as a whole? And what is the basis in ethics and integrity? Are they trained in that? This is a regulated, highly regulated environment. And what type of training and compliance do you see evidence in the service provider? So from a metrics perspective, I've been surprised actually how many service providers we have in my company that actually aren't skilled and disciplined in the use of metrics and scorecards. So I think this is a really critical aspect. Using the use of scorecards needs to be a key criteria, the regular business reviews and the action plans. These are all things that you can then look to as evidence of their ability to partner. They're driven by data. I guess an additional aspect I would ask you to consider is, do they also measure team effectiveness? There are very simple tools that allow you to get data around your team and its effectiveness, and do they have action plans that result from those? And taking this up a level to the organization, do they look at all the different teams that they have in place? Are there management action plans in terms of client satisfaction, achievement of milestones, et cetera? And then also the teams themselves. And then I would say to you, look at the metrics and who sees them and who owns them. So kind of going back to who owns partnership within an organization, where do the metrics get reported? I would suggest that it reflects a degree of seriousness of purpose by knowing who sees those metrics and who's accountable for improving them. From a perspective of improvement, looking for lean methodologies. I know that lean is very widely incorporated in a manufacturing plan, manufacturing environment. But you could ask to see what improvement plans do you have. Those should be able to be shared almost immediately, right? Here are the 5 or 6 initiatives we have based on the lean methodology we have in our organization. That would be important for you to know. And how do they take the knowledge from a case study perspective and grow? In a manufacturing environment, there are challenges. That's not as surprising or maybe even as difficult as then making sure it never happens again. That's the key, right? Learning from those mistakes, optimizing your process so that your supply chain and your management perspective is reliable. And as we look forward from a technology perspective and a team effectiveness and partnering perspective, what is the service provider's perspective on technology? How do they look at this explosion of technology and client portals and all the different things we can use that could potentially increase team effectiveness and help your matrix team reach their objectives? That should be something they've thought about, would give you a feeling of where you could see this partnership potentially providing you that competitive advantage. So what I'm suggesting is taking that customer service piece of the assessment, which is really more of the traditional paradigm, moving that out into partnering ability. And the matrix, just kind of in my shorthand version, is looking at management philosophy, and it's demonstrated by the specifics I was just going through, but talking about their service orientation and partnership ability. The hiring, do they hire the right team? Do they look at these skills? From an engagement perspective, do they keep their employee base motivated? Do they train them to be effective? Do they measure it? And do they improve? Okay. From an assessment of partnership ability as well as the manufacturing and related capabilities, and really I feel like this could be not just manufacturing, it could be just service providers that you need to rely on. You can harness that for your strategic advantage. And that increased reliability with those 5 people, let's say, right, that you've consolidated to, if they're able to keep those commitments to you and you are able to rely on them, it reduces the stress and organizational expenditure of time within your organization and allows you to focus on other priorities, which has been discussed over and over again in the sessions this week. It also allows you to avoid investment in duplicative capabilities. From a manufacturing perspective, which I'm most familiar, that type of investment is incredibly intense. And if you have to take scarce financial resources and deploy them to a manufacturing facility or building capacity within your organization, that's going to be, I was going to say crushing, but really complicating what you could then fund from an innovation perspective and a lot of different uses for that capital. So if you're able to avoid that and rely on the capacity that exists already in the service providers and in the industry, you can prioritize and capitalize on opportunities that drive additional value. There's no reason to look for duplication. You advance your objectives and meet your objectives by utilizing what exists in the market. So I actually went through the matrix and just went through all the different aspects that I was discussing and kind of gave examples of what you could look to see, what evidence there might be, so that it would take this assessment of customer service into partnership ability and take it more from a subjective feeling about just how you feel about a partner, how well you kind of got along with them, were they personable, which is the customer service feel, to really their ability to deliver results for you and what you could see from an evidence-based perspective and be a better predictor of their ability to achieve your results. Okay. And that's all I had. Okay. I don't know if I advanced. Sure.
That was excellent.
I don't know. Okay, there we go.
Quick question before we move on to the next speaker. In the range of manufacturing operations that you do, what proportion of it is associated with product development, clinical trial lots, iterative scale up, versus commercial, manufacture for commercial sale?
So, I'm sorry, so in our business model, it depends on the plant. So some of it is established high volume commercial scale. So from a vaccine manufacturing installed capital base, yeah, we have high volume syringe and vial capabilities. We do have clinical scale as well, and so one of the things is to actually maintain an efficient balance of that installed capital so that we're cost effective for our partners all the way through scale up. So it is a balancing act for us, and I would suggest probably all the different service providers in this space. So that would be, right.
You can work with the partners as they move through those stages.
And then as we talked about you talked about the biotechs and some of the other smaller companies that are looking to lean on service providers, we have those capabilities, and we see those smaller companies taking advantage of that, and then never investing in bricks and mortar on a plant and then utilizing the lines.
Sure.
It becomes more opportunistic with big pharma, project by project, maybe a pinch in resources for a certain period of time, and we see that more fluidly kind of coming in and going out.
Capacity.
Right, right.
Are there questions for Kristie before we go to the next speaker? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.